Hi guys, this is also a new recording. Would like to share with you guys one more recording with from the Tableau educational website. It's about working with totals and aggregations. So how can
Crosstabs are often used as a reference for data, and frequently.
So you have noticed, guys, again and again, they tell you crosstabs are not visualizations, are all about being used as a reference for data, and even can be added to what we call them dashboards. But overall, this is one very major use or purpose for using a crosstabs reference.
It can help the user to see some aggregation like the totals or averages of columns and rows. You can add these from the Analytics pane or the Analytics.
So we can add these aggregations from first, we can add them from the Analytics pane, or I usually call it the Analytics tab. We've done that in the previous class, remember, when we shifted to the Analytics pane, or
Analysis menu. Add these from the Analytics pane or the Analysis menu. In this lesson, you'll learn how to add totals and subtotals and change the aggregation type of your table.
Okay.
I'm working with a table of sales from a coffee chain store. I want to see sales per product line and per market region.
You could do the same with the data that we have in hand. So you can have, or even the hospital data, if you want. You can have the hospital branches over here. You can have the departments over here. Yeah, and then you would like to see maybe the revenue or the number of patients, whatever.
And I'll do this by adding grand totals to the columns and rows. To add grand totals, I'll open the Analysis menu and click Totals. This gives.
We've never used this Analysis menu. It's right on top. So with the Analysis menu, if you can go all the way down to totals, then you can show row grand totals, show column grand totals, add all subtotals, meaning add subtotals on the rows and on the columns, or total all using. We can explore all these.
Gives me a lot of options. I'll first pick Show Row Grand Totals.
Yes.
Then I'll go back to the menu and select Show Column Grand Totals.
So now we have
You can see Tableau adds and labels a column and a row with grand totals.
Yes.
I also want to see each product line, which we can see by adding subtotals to the view. Adding subtotals to each pane can be done in a similar way to the grand totals. We'll return to the Analysis menu, select Totals, and then click Add All Subtotals.
So what is the difference here, guys? The difference is when she went to the Analysis menu and she created the grand totals on rows, all rows had grand totals and all columns had grand totals, but subtotals are defined by the data panes. What are the data panes? It's this chunk of data here, originally separated with this fine gray line. So actually it is the intersection of the high level of details. So over here, the level of details, we have only product lines or your product, here is the market. I'm so sorry. So here we have one level of detail, which is the market central, east, south, and west. Over here, on the other hand, lovely people, we have the highest level of details we have is the product line, and then comes the product. So we have a granularity here. So meaning we have the first level of detail, the second level of detail. Now, when we're adding grand totals to rows, all the rows on the very finest granular level of detail here will have the grand total. But when we're adding subtotals, on the other hand, the subtotals will be added for the first level of detail here. So if the first level of detail, as we can see here, defines each data pane, each data pane. So over here we have the intersection of the first level, the highest level of detail on the rows with the level of detail here, only one level of detail also here on the column. That this intersection gives us the data pane, and the subtotal will be computed on this data pane. So I hope that this is now clear.
This adds totals to each pane in the table.
Yes. And the analytics pane from here. So now let's see how we can add totals from the analytics pane, not the analytics, the analytics pane, but the analysis menu. It's actually the first time I noticed that, guys. Did you guys notice that this is called the analysis menu and this is the analytics pane? Let's take a look.
You can also add totals to a table from the Analytics pane. Click and drag totals to the correct option.
Wait.
This helps you add totals.
Let me explain to my lovelies how does this work.
You can drag totals to the correct option.
Let's take a look, guys, at the options available. We have subtotals. Now you understand what subtotals are. So subtotals are defined by the data pane. The data pane is defined or bordered by the first level of detail for the rows and the columns. Since in this example, on the columns, we have only one level of detail. This is the first level of detail and the only. And the same applies to the rows. And over here, columns, grand total, we understood that. Rows, grand totals, we understand that as well.
Option. This helps you add totals and subtotals fast. Just remember, if you need to edit the defaults, those can be found in the analysis menu.
All right, next. Let me just check what's next. Learn more. The analytics pane, okay. Changing aggregation type. So now we're going to talk about the changing aggregation type. Right now, the aggregation type, as you can see, is sum of sales.
By default, Tableau will total using sum, but you can change the aggregation method if it makes sense for your data. In my sales data example, you'll notice that the totals are much higher for coffee than tea, and much higher in the West than other regions. But the West sells more total products than the other regions, so this data might make more sense to compare by averages. To switch the aggregation type to average, I'll click the drop-down arrow on sales and change the measure from sum to average. You'll see that we could also use other aggregation types, including median and counts. You can see that the total sales for beans and leaves are much closer than originally expected, but average coffee sales in the East are stronger than the West. Notice that when we change the aggregation type to average, all the data in the table is expressed as an average, not just the total. You can also see that the labels for the total and grand totals don't update to indicate this is an average and not a sum. We can manually change the label for those fields. Right-click on the word total and select Format. This opens the formatting pane. We can make a number of changes from here, but to update the header labels, I'll stay on the header pane and change the label from total to average and press Enter. To change the label for grand totals, we'll right-click on grand totals in our view to open the formatting menu and change their titles. If you are connected to...
feeling a little bit... Wait a minute. I wanted to show you something here. Under totals, so we right-click format. Good, easy peasy. Now we have totals. Then we have two labels here. The first one, the first totals, here's totals, and here's the grand totals. Do you guys see that? So the totals, the label here for totals is the label for the columns and rows totals. However, for the grand totals, it's like the grand sum. So this is the little fine observation that you need to make, okay?
And change their titles.
Okay.
If you are connected to a data cube or a multidimensional data source, Tableau can't perform this type of aggregation properly. However, it can aggregate the values that are displayed on the screen. This is helpful for when you are connected to cube data, but it's also helpful to know if you aren't connected to a cube, because you can change how Tableau calculates these totals. Notice that the average sales decaf espresso is $192. This is not an average of the 4 regions. It's an average of all the individual values in the data set.
Did you guys understand what she's saying? It is very important. If you go ahead and pull out your calculator and try to find the average of 170, 160, 160, and 255, you might end up with this number. This number is not a result of the average of these 4 numbers. This number is a result of the average of all the numbers on all the rows on the under the decaf espresso in the data set. That is quite very important for you to know.
Which reflects the fact that there are more sales of decaf espresso in the central market than the east. We call this a weighted average. This weighted average can't be calculated with a cube.
Okay.
The average reflects the fact that there are more sales of decaf espresso in the central market than the east. We call this a weighted average. This weighted average can't be calculated with a cube. If you still want an average of data from your cube, go to the Analysis menu and click Totals. We have the option to total all using and our choice of aggregation types. Using this menu will switch Tableau to a local computation, or a calculation based on the displayed values. If we select Average, the tables update showing the average of all the values displayed on the screen. Now the sales for
Awesome. So now, if you want to compute or calculate the average of these 4 numbers showing on the screen, which is now 186, you go to the Analysis top menu and go to, of course, Totals and Aggregation using an average. Do you want to see it again? Here. She went over to the Analysis menu, Totals, and then Total all using. And I think maybe this is a very important tip. So originally, as is, the grand totals and the totals that are computed by default from Tableau is actually the averages of all the records or the data points in the data source, not the average of the numbers showing or displaying on the screen. And if you want to show this average, here we go. I hope now you memorize this rather.
The tables update showing the average of all the values displayed on the screen. Now the sales for decaf espresso drops to $186 since Tableau has calculated the average for each of the 4 regions and then averaged these 4 values. Calculating an average of an average is not mathematically sound practice, so be careful how you adjust the aggregation in your totals.
Yeah, be very careful.
Remember, usually if you want to change the aggregation for your totals, change it on the Measure field.
Okay, so where would you click to change the aggregation type? Where do you click to change the aggregation type? Will you click here? Yeah, of course, you click here and then you get the aggregation type. Okay.
In this lesson, you've learned how to add totals and subtotals to your crosstabs and how to change the aggregation of the view. Now you're ready to try it yourself.
Very good. Thank you so much. That was a very interesting video as well. All right, guys, as far as this video, this is it, and I will see you in the next video.